Hey guys, so today we're going to wrap up taking a look at World War II by talking about the end of the war and its legacy. So you should have a graphic organizer that looks like this. It's got like a chart down here that says the Paris Peace Conference, cost of the war at the top. So just to kind of remind you where we left off last time, the Americans had joined in pretty close to the end of the war in 1917, shipped overseas, and gave kind of a new enthusiasm to the soldiers over there, and things in Germany were not great, right? There was an economic depression in Germany. The Kaiser had become pretty unpopular, and so things in Germany are not going so well. And they kind of hope at the last minute when Russia drops out of the war, maybe we've got a chance, right? But they don't, and the Americans end up pushing them out of France, and the Kaiser is exiled from his own country. They actually kick their own king out, right? And they surrender to the United States. So the surrender, or the armistice of the war, takes place on the 11th day of the 11th month at the 11th hour on November 11th, 1918 at 11 a.m. Yes, they planned it that way. But this is why, if you've ever noticed, we celebrate Veterans Day on a specific day every year, November 11th. It actually used to be called Armistice Day. It has gone on to be a day that we celebrate all veterans, but the idea at the time was that it was there just to be for World War II veterans. So the armistice was passed on that day in order to end the war. So let's look at some of the costs of the war here. We're looking at both physical cost, military cost, economic cost of the war. So the first thing is in deaths. Over 22 million people died. That had been higher than any other death toll in any other war ever in American or in world history. What's interesting to note is 11 million of those deaths were non-military. They were civilians. This is a war that was fought in and around people's homes, right? So this is a pretty big deal. The other thing to notice here is that this is a war that affected more than just the actual people, but it affected the minds of the people as well. Even those soldiers that did come back often suffered from PTSD. They didn't know post-traumatic stress at that time. That's what that stands for, post-traumatic stress disorder. They called it shell shock. And so even those that came back were kind of mentally messed up. So there's that aspect of it as well. In terms of money, the direct economic cost of the war was about $338 billion. That's in today's money. But that's still a huge amount. This deals with like rebuilding, soldiers, food, all of this kind of stuff. So there's a lot of money that goes into fighting these wars. The last thing that we have here is this idea of the lost generation. So think about these young men who went off to fight in this war. Those doughboys, right? Young guys, 18 to 25 years old. They don't know what to expect. They're excited, right? They're going to fight a war and they're going to defeat the Germans. But instead, what happened is they came of age during this war, right? This is an impressionable time for these young men, and a lot of them just were never quite the same again. So that generation is both physically lost, so many of them died, but they're also lost in other ways as well. The word "the lost generation" actually ended up applying mostly to these authors who had fought in the war. Men like Ernest Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, they left the United States and went over to Paris, most of them, and they wrote about their war experiences. They struggled with their PTSD, and really this is a generation that was never quite the same. That's why Veterans Day is so important, I think, for us, just to bring it back to reality here. You notice I have a picture of a poppy in the upper left-hand corner. The poppy became like a remembrance symbol, and I think today it still means a lot, especially in parts of the world, like in Britain. World War I is a much bigger deal there because they fought it for so much longer. So there's a lot of thought that goes behind this, and there's this question of, was this worth it? Was this war really over something worth fighting over? And was all of the cost that came out of it really helping anything? right? So this particular page just shows you some of the deaths here. You can see that in terms of the number of deaths, Germany ranked the highest, especially when you compare that they mobilized the most, right? So this just kind of gives you a good picture. I've highlighted the deaths of the main allied countries here. Turkey is part of Austria-Hungary, so that's kind of where that comes in. Italy, remember, joined with the British and French. Russia also, they mobilized them the highest numbers. They also had a really high number of deaths. That's part of the reason they wanted to drop out after the revolution. So this just kind of gives you a good overall picture of what was going on here in this conflict. This particular picture kind of shows you how the landscape of Europe even was messed up. Trench warfare messed up the territory. So that's going to be a big part of how this war even just had an effect on the land itself, right? So there is this question of, is it really worth it? But a war doesn't end with an armistice. A war ends with a peace treaty. So the peace conference is held the next year in 1919 in Paris. And it's going to be a really important treaty, not because of the things that come out of it, but because of the things that don't, okay? So we start by talking about the Big Four. The Big Four were the top 4 leaders who met in Paris to negotiate this treaty. So first we have Woodrow Wilson of the United States. Woodrow Wilson really wants to make peace lasting. He wants to solve the issues that started the whole conflict in the first place. He's really kind of like the balm, right? He wants to soothe everything and make it better. The other guys, not quite as considerate as Wilson. The next guy we have is France. Their prime minister was a guy named Clemenceau. Clemenceau wants revenge against the Germans. Capital R, revenge. Remember, most of the war was fought in France, right? They suffered some of the most damage. They hate Germany, and they want revenge against Germany. The other thing they want is some of Germany's territory. There's some pieces of territory that border France and Germany that they want for their own, okay? So that's what they're looking to get out of this. Britain, run by a prime minister named David Lloyd George, his phrase here was make Germany pay. This is also revenge. There's also physical payment, reparations, money, payment. So that's a big part of this here. So that's where Great Britain is coming from. Poor Orlando from Italy, he just kind of wants to fit in. Remember, Italy was kind of the odd man out. One of the things he really wants is some of Austria-Hungary's territory, because Italy and Austria-Hungary are right there next to each other. Unfortunately, he doesn't get everything he wants. Unfortunately for him, I guess. So Wilson comes to this meeting in Paris with a plan that he'd come up with called the 14 Points, okay? The 14 Points was a speech he had given to Congress with a list of 14 things that he had come up with to solve all these problems. Things like navigation of the open seas, boundaries of these nation states. He also comes up with something called the League of Nations, which was a peacekeeping organization that the whole world would get together in and kind of be able to solve these problems so we wouldn't get into another major world war. Now, this sounds really nice, doesn't it? Like, oh, Wilson, good for you. Does it sound like something that France and Britain and Italy want? Yeah, not so much, right? Most of his 14 points are rejected. Only one of them actually makes it into the treaty, and we'll talk about which one that is in a second. I also want to point out who is not invited to this conference. Who is missing? Think about the allies, think about the enemies. There are a few people missing. Turkey, which is part of Austria-Hungary, which is half of Austria-Hungary, Austria, Germany, and Russia. How do you think they feel about not being invited to this conference when there are going to be things that affect them in this treaty, right? Probably not crazy about it, right? So the treaty itself has several different points to it. The first thing they do is break up the Austrian Empire. And from the Austrian Empire, they create 9 new nations: Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Serbia, Bosnia, others of these nations. So they basically say, you get to be your own country, and Austria goes from this to this, right? Really teeny tiny. The other thing they do is break up Turkey, or the Ottoman Empire, into colonies. So instead of breaking it up into forming independent countries, Britain and France are like, I want this, I want this, I want this. Now you'll notice that Italy doesn't get the territory they wanted, right? Remember, they wanted some of Austria-Hungary. They didn't get it. Instead, they just kind of got ignored. Like, sorry, you don't get what you want. You were kind of a turncoat anyway, right? Yeah. So, Germany, they get demilitarized. Means they don't get to have a navy. They don't get to have an army. They don't get to have anything. Rude, right? Then, they have to sign something called the War Guilt Clause. The War Guilt Clause says we take complete and total responsibility for this war. Was it Germany's fault? No, Austria's fault, right? But Germany has to take all of the blame for it. And not only that, they have to pay for the war. They have to pay what are known as reparations, or basically they are repairing, right, the costs of the war to these other European countries. Billions of dollars have to be repaid, and it's going to take Germany almost 100 years to pay it back, because they can't, you can't afford that much, especially because Germany went after the war in terms of economics. They do put in Wilson's baby, the League of Nations, this worldwide peacekeeping organization where representatives from countries all over the world would come together, try to make peace. If this sounds familiar to you, it is because we have a similar organization today. The League of Nations no longer exists, but we do have the United Nations, which is the same idea. So, yay, treaty gets signed, everything's good, Wilson takes it back home and all of America's happy, right? Yeah, no, not so much. America is actually not thrilled with this treaty. Particularly, there is a guy named Henry Cabot Lodge. He's a Republican senator, and he hates the League of Nations. He thinks that the League of Nations is basically trying to take power away from the United States, and he fights against it. He believes it's unconstitutional. He doesn't want any part of it. He hates it. And in fact, because Wilson has his stroke and is not really able to push the treaty, it is not ratified by the Senate, which means the United States doesn't officially sign the treaty, and we never join the League of Nations because of it. So Wilson's baby, the one thing he wanted to get out of this treaty, the League of Nations, the United States does not join. It's a blow, right? Unfortunately, Wilson dies not long after this, and so he doesn't really live to see a lot of the effects of this, but the League is going to be pretty ineffective, and part of that reason it's speculated is because we didn't get to join. So, just a couple pictures here for you. This shows you the map of Europe before the war and the map of Europe after the war. So you can see how the German and Austrian empires are completely broken up, right? You'll notice that Italy doesn't really change. They don't really get the territory they wanted. But the rest of Europe kind of gets their own national sort of government, right? This is a political cartoon that is against the senators. So if you look at it here, the senator is afraid, see that horrible vulture, take it away, take it away. And what is the horrible vulture? It's the League of Nations. How is it represented? It's a dove, right? A dove is a symbol of peace. It's got an olive branch in its mouth, which is also a symbol of peace. So basically this political cartoon is saying, you're crazy to be afraid of the League of Nations. It is a peacekeeping organization. Why in the world would you be afraid of it, right? Well, this political cartoon says why we should be afraid of it, right? So there's a lot going on in this cartoon, so let's break it down. First of all, the first thing you should notice is it's a wedding. And who is it a wedding between? This guy in the back looks pretty much like Uncle Sam, right? Well, that's because he is. It's a wedding between Uncle Sam and this ugly woman that is foreign entanglements. So getting involved in foreign countries, foreign, powers. That's who he's getting married to. Woodrow Wilson is the minister, okay? What is he thrown down on the ground? Peace proceedings. And what is he reading out of? The League of Nations. So they are being married by Wilson and the League of Nations. And Wilson, the preacher, is saying, if any man can show just cause why they may not be lawfully joined together, let him speak now, ... or forever hold the peace. Hey, who's going to be speaking now? The hero of the day, the U.S. Senate, bursting through the stained glass window, holding the Constitution in his hand, saying, if we join the League of Nations, we're going to marry ourselves to foreign affairs, and we are taking away our constitutional rights as a nation. So that's the argument against the League of Nations. So this just kind of wraps up the war. We're going to see a lot of these effects of it later. But I want to let you end with just a quick little analogy that I think is kind of funny, that says, if World War I was a bar fight. So let's listen to how it would go down if World War I was a bar fight. Germany, Austria, and Italy, the alliance, are standing together in the middle of a pub when Serbia bumps into Austria and spills Austria's pint. Austria demands that Serbia buy it a whole new suit because of the new beer stains on its trouser leg. Germany expresses its support for Austria's point of view. Britain recommends that everybody just calm down a bit. Serbia points out it can't afford a whole suit, but offers to pay for the cleaning of Austria's trousers. Russia and Serbia look at Austria. Austria asks Serbia what it's looking at. Russia suggests that Austria leave its little brother alone. Austria inquires as to whose army will assist Russia in doing so. Germany appeals to Britain and France that France has been looking at it and that it's sufficiently out of order that Britain not intervene, so not hold France back. Britain replies that France can look at who it wants to, and that Britain is looking at Germany too, and what is Germany going to do about it? Germany tells Russia to stop looking at Austria, or Germany will render Russia incapable of looking at anyone. Britain and France ask Germany whether it's looking at Belgium. Turkey and Germany go off into a corner and whisper. When they come back, Turkey makes a show of not looking at anyone. Germany rolls up its sleeve, looks at France, and punches Belgium. France and Britain punch Germany. Austria punches Russia. Germany punches Britain and France with one hand, and Russia with the other. Russia throws a punch at Germany, but misses and nearly falls over. Japan calls from the other side of the room that it's on Britain's side, but stays there. Italy surprises everyone by punching Austria. Australia punches Turkey and gets punched back. There are no hard feelings because Britain made Australia do it. France gets thrown through a plate glass window, but gets back up and carries on fighting. Russia gets thrown in through another one, gets knocked out, suffers a brain damage, and wakes up with a complete personality change. Italy throws a punch at Austria and misses, but Austria falls over anyway. Italy raises both fists in the air and runs around the room chanting. America waits till Germany is about to fall over from sustained punching from Britain and France, then walks over and smashes it with a bar stool, then pretends it won the fight all by itself. By now, all of the chairs are broken and the big mirror over the bar is shattered. Britain, France, and America agree that Germany threw the first punch, so the whole thing was Germany's fault. While Germany is still unconscious, they go through its pockets, steal its wallet, and buy drinks for all its friends. So that's just a little analogy that if this was a bar fight, this is how it would go down. So if you want to take another look at this, I've got this in my classroom. But that just kind of wraps up the war for us. Hope you enjoyed learning about World War I. I'll see you in class. Bye.